It varies from person to person.
Okay.
It varies from person to person. So you always want to affirm and applaud, acknowledge the positives with a young person. We know that the younger the people are when we intervene, the better chance we have of making change. So you do want to model the positive. You want to affirm when you see that behavior in the child. You don't necessarily have to go overboard. An acknowledgement, good job, well done, and you can move on. You don't have to spend 15 minutes praising the child, because then that attention-seeking behavior is what you're building, right?
Right.
So unless you praise me for 15 minutes, I'm going to act out, right? So acknowledging, allowing the person to recognize that they've done it right, and moving on is what you want to do. And we know that if you have a valence to it, a negative is about 25 cents. A positive is about 5 to 10 cents. So in the course of the day, you can do several positives, but one negative can send the balance back toward the negative. So you're always in this issue of attrition and gain. Two steps. Yes, that's right. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, and then you have to start over again. So your ability to be patient and continue to teach and affirm is what gets you in the forward progress, because you're going to go, and I do this with people too. I love to do this. So this is what people expect you to walk like this, right? When really progress looks like this.
Feels like that.
That's exactly right. This is progress, because I'm not where I was, but I'm not where you expect me to be. And unless you have that headset in your mind, you're going to be very, very frustrated and probably going to leave the field. That's really what progress looks like. Very slow. So, okay. So we look at attachment. Attachment is a very important part of normal growth and development. And so attachment really talks about the ability of the child to recognize that the parent is a safe, secure area, agent, institution, whatever you want to call it. Attachment really means that the child has a place or a person that they can call safe zone. So there are a variety of behaviors that encourage attachment, and we're going to get there in a moment. Individual children, to make it simple, have secure or insecure attachment. There are several degrees of attachment. I'm not going to go into the complexity of all of them. So let's just say secure and insecure attachment. And basically what we're talking about is the ability for the call and response to take hold with the child and the parent. So it starts fundamentally with feeding, right? So if the child is hungry and you feed the child, you're doing a good thing. You're going to give some eye contact with the child, right? You're going to have the child sort of looking back at you because they are getting the facial features, they're getting your smell, your sounds. All of that is coming into their awareness of you as part of them. Because first they got to figure out, what am I? Then they got to figure out who you are. Then they got to figure out, what is my relationship to you? And some point down the line, they got to try to figure out, who am I? It's all a process. So your ability to feed, your ability to keep warm, keep them warm, your ability to hold or to cuddle or to interact with them, your ability to smile with them, All of these help the child to recognize the important people in their world. That's bonding and attachment. And you become an individual that they go to for safety when there's the perception of threat from the outside. All you have to do is watch a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old in a crowd. That 4-year-old and 5-year-old, they're looking up at the individual to see whether or not emotionally they're okay or not okay. If they're okay, then, you know, they're going to walk forward. If they're not okay, it's right behind the leg, right? Because they're looking for the safety and the security. If you can be that, you're doing a good thing. If you're not that, the child is still learning, but what they're learning is a very different set of truths than the truth that you would like for them to learn. And we call that insecure attachment. If you're not there for the child, if you're not meeting their needs, if you're not responding to them, they learn, but what they learn is an insecure attachment, and what we see is that they will avoid. Some theorists think that they avoid in order to find a manageable place that the adult can handle. Some theorists think that they avoid because they are trying to avoid being overwhelmed by the rejection of the adult. Does that make sense? Those two things. So one is about what you can tolerate, and so I'll stay away because if I come closer, you're going to yell at me. Okay, so I'm going to stay away. The other is I'm not going to approach because I don't want you to reject me. Right? So I'm saving myself from the overwhelming emotion of feeling your rejection. Because what I want is your attention. Make sense? Okay. Babies stare at faces. The facial expressions begin a process of learning about emotional states. So we learn a lot as babies about emotional states by the facial features of the adults. Babies can tell a difference between a smile and a frown. If you play peekaboo with a baby, right? You put up a screen or something, you disappear. The baby will look kind of startled and wondering, and then you lower the screen and you're smiling, the baby will smile too, because here you are back again. See, for babies, either you're here or you're not here, right? It's either you are or you're not. Period. You're not. And so when you put up the screen, you're not. And then you lower the screen, you are. Okay, cool. Okay. And so you do that a number of times. You are, you're not. You are, you're okay. And so babies learn that you are there, and over a process of time, they learn that even when you do go away, you are going to come back. That's a very important thing. But you think about a crack house. Their parents leave for days, and they don't come back. They said they were going to the store, and then they don't come back. What is the learning on the part of the kid when that happens in the house? They cope, but how they cope and what they believe and what their values become, that's the stuff we're talking about.
Just think when kids are separated from their parents at the border.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
They're saying that some kids, when they're reunited with their parents, are still scared. When their father leaves for work or their mom goes to the store, they're saying, "You're not coming back. I don't believe it. I'm scared.
Yep.
I don't think you're coming back."
Yep. Yep. It's much more difficult for the children than the government would like for you to believe. Now, some children will get over it and go forward. Other children will be deeply affected because we know that the reaction to trauma varies from person to person. So for some, yes, difficult. For others, they'll put it in perspective. That ability to put things in perspective, very important. Okay, around 1 year old, under the normal circumstances, children will track the eye movement and pointing of adult. You can tell that there's progress being made in their development because you point and they look in that direction. The child's emotional response will reflect the adult's emotion. So when you smile and do ha, then they do ha, because we're having a great time, right? All right. By learning to associate emotional cues from the adult, the child begins a social learning pattern and social interaction behaviors. So they are watching to see how you, the adult, interact. And they learn their patterns from the way you interact. And these establish the foundation and architecture in the brain. In other words, the development of neural connections happening in the brain, stimulated by the social interaction of the call and response, is critical during the developmental years. And I call the developmental years those birth to 4, they say birth to 3, I say birth to 4 years, where it really is just a very, very intense development of neural tracts within the brain. And you get these developmental plateaus and surges. So if you miss some information on one of those surges, it is difficult to make it up, which is why some individuals have great difficulty, say, in social interaction, because what they have experienced early on doesn't give them the necessary neurological connections to respond in appropriate, what we call appropriate ways. Okay? All right. In the 7 to 17 years, we see frontal cortex and parietal cortex, hippocampus, and amygdala increase in complexity. I gave you a little picture of a brain in there. The hippocampus remains relatively stable. I'm going to put that down for a second. So, fundamentally, knows stuff.
Okay.
We want to talk about some areas, and I don't want to go into too much depth, but it's important to know that early life is really about the limbic system. It's about the emotionality. And the emotionality, I'm going to put this down. The emotionality is really about these areas right in here, in the sides of the brain. They're deep inside, but the hypothalamus is in there, right? And the hippocampus is in there, and the amygdala is in there. And so those areas of the brain are very critical in early life. And so when you're making impressions with a child, you're activating those areas. The stimulation of those areas, when it's positive, you get the flow of dopamine. When it's negative, you get the flow of cortisol. Rather than going into all of the corticoadrenal stuff that happens, we won't go there. But what's important to know is you got happy juice, which is dopamine, and you got ugly juice, which is cortisol and adrenaline. It's only ugly in the sense that it's attached to negative experience. The effect of cortisol is really about mediating the perception of threat, which means it makes the difficult trauma experience more manageable for the human being. It doesn't wipe it out, it doesn't take it away, it makes it more manageable. And so what happens is that when you have adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and you have multiple ACEs, basically you wear out the mechanism of the hypothalamus, the pituitary at the base of the brain, and the adrenal, which, do you know where adrenaline comes from? Do you know where it's produced in the body? Have any idea? And where are they? You get an A? Yes, yeah. And we don't think about that, right? The kidneys are down here, right? Right? In the lower back. And so your brain is sending signals, right, to have the kidneys release adrenaline. And the cortisol and adrenaline are helping you to manage what you are now perceiving as, whoa, danger, danger, okay? But what happens with increased exposure to trauma is basically you don't wear out the circuitry, you wear out the spots where that chemistry can be effective because we have receptors, right? I did not put a picture of, I have neural pictures with little spots on them that are receptors of the chemistry. When we talk chemistry, you know, if you take an M&M and you divide it into quadrants, right? And you divide those quadrants, so you have 1,000,000 pieces. It's one of those millionths that we're talking about in terms of chemistry that's necessary sometimes for hormonal stuff to make changes in the body. So we're not talking about heavy injections of stuff. We're talking about very, very small amounts of chemistry because fundamentally, we're chemical factories. We're chemical and electrical factories. That's what we are. And so the calcium, the glucose that we have in our bodies helps our brain to initiate and to spark, and they send signals. Pain is not actually in your finger when you smash it with a hammer. Pain is in the brain, right? Pain is in the brain. So your brain is saying, whoa, something happened, and it then locates the nerve and says, it's in your finger. And you go, okay, there it is in your finger. But when you hit it with that hammer, it feels like your pain is right there in your finger. But your brain is going, shoop, finger, right? So your brain is really the factory that is interpreting all of this stimulation that your body senses are experiencing.
I just was thinking, maybe we can get our food and come back in and continue. Can we continue
Sure.
the presentation while we're eating? Okay, so we're gonna take a few minutes to get our food and then come right back in. So that way we're not missing and losing time.
So you have to
Um,
turn off your...
Sergio, come turn the camera off, sir. That way we'll get out. We're gonna take a little bit of a break so the people can get their food. Okay, yeah, we're sorry about that. Okay, that's okay.
Right? We have to walk before we run, right? And this whole thing of, do we put the heel down on the floor first? Do we put the toe down on the floor first? It's a progression, and it has to happen in the brain, the coordination, because most babies, when they begin to locomote, they'll put the toe down, right? So they walk on the toe like this, right? And it takes time before the heel strikes the floor. It's one of the ways that we know that we're progressing in a normal way. Likewise, in the brain, this prefrontal lobe area is late to develop. And so when we really think about it, we ask our teens many times, did you think before you did what you did? And the answer really is no, because teens are more about excitement and adventure, excitation and adventure. Their prefrontal lobe is still under construction, and the hormones that affect the development of the prefrontal cortex driving them crazy. So many times the real answer is our teens don't think before they do, because that ability to rationally think and work through, if I do this, then that might happen, it's not there. It varies from person to person. We kind of know from the research that you ladies become more mature than us guys in those teen years. I don't see why y'all are smiling, so I don't understand why that has to be. Yeah, right. Yeah, so many times we see more facility for rational thought and problem solving with females than we do for males in the teens. I know I'm being real hard on the males today, but neurologically it is a fact. So if you think about trauma and the ways in which trauma impacts an individual, if you early in the years of your life, and those traumatic experiences are numerous in your life, you are really then wearing out, affecting the receptors in the brain which help you to regulate, and by doing so, you become more in tune with the limbic system emotionality and less in tune with the prefrontal area, which allows you to problem solve and be more rational. Does that make sense? You can get stuck there, which means that you miss those gradations in development, those stepwise gradations, and you can get stuck with an emotionality that overwhelms and the inability to problem solve. And that is why much of what we do in terms of working with people is about trying to help them to help this part of their brain to develop as much as it can. And so those organized kinds of structured activities, we see it early on with play activity, but organization, clean your room. Clean your room. Put your stuff away. Get your backpacks for school. Get your books in your backpack for school. Where's the notepad? Where's the pencil? Get a pen. Get a pencil. Get one extra so that one, And so you're going through all of that with your teen who, that's your agenda, not your teen's agenda. So they're very self-centered and focused on their agenda, and they want to throw off your agenda unless education, interaction has been promoted and supported and affirmed earlier in the life. Very important aspect. When we talk about attachment, bonding, and parenting, it's important to recognize that you get much further with the cooperation of a young person than the discipline/punishment of a young person. Setting boundaries with a young person, very important and necessary, but punishment without a pathway, once again, a pathway to correct behavior, to acceptable behavior, it doesn't do anything. So if you're just punishing, what you're going to get is an acting out kid. If you're disciplining with boundaries and setting the appropriate behavior, which many parents do not do, then you're helping them to learn what direction to go in. So when you go into a store, you can't just pick up whatever it is. You got to pay for it, right? And so you're teaching pay for it, and you're getting them in the right direction. Because you'll also be in competition with their peers, and that is a very influential group with the kids. So you'll notice that those kids who have significant trauma will tend to relate to other kids who have significant trauma. Do you know why that is?
Because they understand each other.
Because they understand each other. That's right. Because one of the things that we quest for is to be understood. You're always hearing teenagers saying, you don't understand me. You don't understand me. You don't get it. You don't get it. You're old. You don't understand me. You're my parent. You don't understand me. Which is many times when I do the work in my office, I'll work with a family. I'll say exactly the same thing the parent has said. The kid can hear it from me, but they can't hear it from the parent. Because that history of relationship with the parent sets up that boundary and that defense, and so I'm not taking it. Whereas I, a stranger that you would think, I don't trust him, but over time, learning to trust, I can say something, exactly the same thing, the kid will take it from me and not from the parent. So history in relationships, trust in relationships, bridging in relationships, reasonable requests and responses, affirmations in relationships, all of these are very important to establishing a relationship that works in the parent-child domain. I gave you a sheet. Factors which affect child behavior. We've talked some about nurturance. that call and response, the ability of the parent to respond to the needs of the child, very important. Need gratification, the ability of the parent to fulfill, gratify the needs of the child. And I'm talking about sleep needs, warmth needs, cuddling needs, holding needs, feeding needs. Those are needs. Not giving your kid every toy on the face of the earth. That is not a need. In a house, there is enough. You know, parenting is actually a very pretty straightforward thing when you think about it. Because you can learn more from pots and pans in the house than you can from some of the computer stuff and computer games that we use and give to our children. You have to be aware that the system in the world, the industrial and commercial system in the world, places itself in a perspective which creates a demand in you.
Want to go to Target later?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, you know, I see phones around the room. Phones around the room. Phones around the room. I see people who must have the latest. Anyone have an i10 phone? They have a plan now.
None of us make that much money.
Yeah, really. I don't have one. They have a plan now where you can buy the phone and they'll put you on some kind of plan, and when the new phone comes out, you'll get the new phone. And what they do then is keep you paying. They just keep you paying. So many times it is important for us to recognize that the commercial world is not about your well-being. The commercial, yes, it is not about your well-being. Socks and underwear, that's about as far as I'll go. Okay?
Show me the money.
Socks and underwear, because the commercial world is really about making money for the entity, for the corporation. And psychology types are very good at putting the kind of commercial advertising in place that make you think that if you don't buy this, you're really a bad person. Or if you do this, if you buy this luxury van, you will see the sunset and the horizon, and you'll find that absolutely right person for you, and you'll live in heavenly bliss from now until... You get the picture?
That's what the commercials show.
That's what the commercial shows. And so, as a parent, we really have to delineate between commercialism and what is good for our kids. We know that they put the colorful stuff down on the lower shelf, and that is so your kids will run into it and go, "Mommy, mommy, 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 mommy." Right? All the bubble gum is down there, all the candy is down there, colorful, 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 light, bright, bright colors, right? It is simply to capture your kid, and it's all sugar. It's all sugar. We need glucose. Doctor, we need glucose.
Confirm.
It's what helps the brain to function. But we put, remember I said you cut that M&M, into 1,000,000 parts. That's about 1/1,000,000th of it. That's what we need, right? So we put so much of this stuff into our system. Carbohydrates break down into sugars. Alcohol breaks down into a sugar. So we put so much of this stuff in our system, it overwhelms us. And it affects our physiology, our biology in ways which make us sick. So we do need to make a discerning decision using the prefrontal lobe. I say education is the key. About what to give our kids, how much to give our kids, when to give our kids, what boundaries we set with our kids. And we always want to be talking with our kids. Talking with our kids.
If you noticed, before Betsy Hodges left office, before she lost the election, she started to talk about that infant-parent relationship, how
helps us to understand the language, we're also pushing concepts and associations. If the brain had to, off the point, but I'm going to say it, if the brain had to really figure out a chair in all of its various forms, or a table in all of its various forms, there wouldn't be enough time in the world, right? Because there are just too many of them. So the beauty of the brain is that it can capture, associate, assimilate, record, recall, and delineate. Okay? So that out there, which doesn't look anything like this in here, is still a chair. Because my brain can figure out that both of them belong in that classification. We really don't have time to make all of those. The brain didn't help us to do that. So likewise, when you're talking and interacting with your child, both the verbal and the nonverbal, in that 0, birth time to 5 years old, I just stretched it one more year. What we're really doing is helping the neurology to expand, to grow, to connect, to make channels, which then allow a greater diversity in the learning pattern of the child. It's very important, especially when it comes to problem solving, because we know that problem solving creates frustration for children. Frustration without a path for problem solving creates acting out, right? So if you frustrate your child without some solution in place, they're going to act out. So our talking, working with, do you remember? No. You don't remember this. However, they used to make little books, and your little child would take this little book and you'd open it up and there'd be a shoelace. Or you'd open a page and there'd be a zipper. Or you'd open a page and
or
there'd be
fuzzy.
there'd be a button. Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Really? Okay. Then I'm not as ancient as I thought. Well, maybe I am. Okay. But you get my point. So we start, and parents forget this, we start with the simplest stuff. Your child taking their first steps lights up the face of a parent that's paying attention, right? And so that expression, oh my God, look at that, or the first words from a child, you said mama, you said daddy, just the expression on the face for a child just reaffirms, connects, makes the bonding, they smile, you smile, they come to you, it just makes that connection and it makes the brain grow. When we do that stuff, we are fortifying the child in terms of their ability to face the challenges in their world, because those challenges just get more and more complex as they go forward. Those challenges are what you want them to be willing to initiate, take on, and master. But if you don't start early, and they have a bunch of frustration as the name of the game, and no solution, no pathway, then what you get is a bunch of amygdala overactivity, and that amygdala overactivity shuts them down. It affects their self-concept, it affects their self-esteem, and they don't do anything. Why? No. Because now my objective is to avoid the negative. No, I don't know. Failure. No, I don't want to, because you're nagging at me. You did your homework. You did your math. Well, what about your backpack? No, I don't want to, so no, I'm not going to do it. And I'm shut down, right? And so now my neurology, my brain, has a completely different idea about life, and what it's about. And I take that with me as my traumatic belief. Parents come and they go, period. You can't rely on the kid that sits outside of school waiting for the parent that does not show up. How many times does it take for that experience before the kid decides you can't rely on them? And then the kid goes off with somebody else, right? And now we got problems. So often we put the cart before the horse when the kid is trying to cope because it's cold outside, and now you've lost credibility as a parent. The kid is trying to cope. You're pissed at the kid. All messed up. Yeah. So this is how easily things can change when it comes to traumatic events for a child. They will cope, but the way that they cope is very different. The learning that they have is very different than what we would expect. So I put down here some call and response stuff. I put down here some nurturance stuff, and I put down here some task orientation. The task orientation is basically taking on a challenge that you have a high probability of success. That's it. I want you to pour the tea in the cup. There are 4 cups. I want you to fill the cups. Pretty simple, right? And so being able to do that is a challenge, right? Being able to do it is what you do. I want you to get the plates from the... So when you give small tasks to a child, I do like that you give them chores. So when you are in a household and your child has chores, that's a good thing. Why? Because it's a challenge, it's a task, and it creates organization for them. So even though your challenge may be that your child does not want to cooperate, do not give up. Continue to push the point, because their ability to hear the importance of the task and modeling that you show them how and responsibility that they take on the task gives them a pathway for success. You affirm that success, build self-esteem, and then you can go forward with the next task. Make sense? Cool. So, very simple. What we're really talking about is being close, emotional support, feeding, being responsive, protecting, and playing. Playing is very important for children. It teaches them so many things about the way life can run. And it has a very important function, which is the delay of gratification. So you got a 4-year-old, very, very hungry, comes in the house, Mom, 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 I'm hungry, Mom, I'm hungry, Mom, I'm hungry. What? Mom's in the kitchen. What does Mom say? What does Mom say? Mom, I'm hungry, Mom, I'm hungry. She's in the kitchen.
Go outside and play.
Until?
Dinner here.
So you have to wait. Delayed gratification. So your ability to regulate your emotion, because you're learning that not everything happens in your time slot, is vitally important to everything else that you will do. And under stress, under trauma experiences, this regulation of emotion becomes very difficult for you. So they're more likely to have difficulty regulating their emotion because they've never been able to figure out how that process works. They're emotional, and they're emotional, and they're emotional. They may cry themselves to sleep, or they may say, there's no sense in crying, it's not changing anything. You know, when you get to that place of being able to reflect, right? So these copings diminish our ability to have the necessary social skills. You need delayed gratification if you're talking with sharing with a kid, right? I got a ball. You want to see it? My answer is no. Because mine, right? You want to see it? No. I have to have delayed gratification in order to understand that if I give you the ball, you will eventually give it back. And I have the emotional patience to wait until that happens without attacking you. We take it for granted, but it's a learned process. And unless you experience it early on, if you try to take that ball, I'm going to attack you. Because that physical aggression is one way that I know I can achieve my objective, which is to hang on to the ball. Make sense? Okay. So, we've already been here. See, we can zip through this. Trauma affects how we perceive experience. We've already talked about that. How we conceptualize the rational, irrational with the prefrontal lobe. The limbic system, the emotionality stuff in the amygdala and cortisol. How we behave, how we cope with the stuff that we experience in life, and what we remember, the hippocampus. So what we remember early experience stuff goes very deep in the hippocampus, which is why we struggle with stuff like abandonment fears, which is why we struggle with stuff like sexual abuse, because the hippocampus will capture it. The physiology remembers, even though the brain literally cannot give you